Lily sat on the witness stand, her legs dangling just above the polished wooden floor, and clutched the edge of the platform so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The courtroom seemed enormous, its towering ceilings echoing with whispers, shuffles of papers, and the occasional cough from a nervous spectator. Outside, a late winter sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the room. But inside, the warmth of sunlight could not touch the cold, heavy air that pressed down on Lily like a physical weight. Her mother's eyes were fixed on her from the gallery, a mixture of fear, hope, and silent encouragement. She had been through months of torment, accusations that could ruin a life, a career, and a reputation. Yet here was Lily, small and fragile-looking, but her resolve radiated through every movement. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. Max, her golden retriever, sat perfectly still at the defense attorney's side, his ears flicking occasionally as he surveyed the room. His deep brown eyes reflected the polished wood, the bright lights, and most importantly, Lily. They shared a bond that went far beyond the ordinary, a silent understanding that had been nurtured over countless hours of practice, of signals whispered between them in private, unseen by the adults who thought this was just a courtroom, a place where humans decided fates. They had no idea that today, a dog and a little girl could turn their entire world upside down. The prosecutor slammed a heavy file onto the desk with a sharp crack that reverberated across the room. It was an act designed to intimidate, to assert control, but Lily's gaze didn't waver. She had seen his kind before, confident, loud, sure of their power until the truth was revealed. Her fingers twitched slightly, almost imperceptibly, a signal she had memorized for weeks. Max's head jerked ever so subtly in response, his body tensing like a coiled spring. The judge, a tall man with graying hair and eyes that rarely betrayed emotion, cleared his throat. "Miss Lily, please state your name for the record." His voice carried authority, but there was an unusual edge to it, as if he sensed that something about this trial was different from the countless others he had presided over. Lily swallowed hard, her throat dry, but her voice came out clear. "Lily Harper." Her words seemed to hang in the air, delicate and small, yet carrying a weight that even the adults could feel. She glanced at her mother, who gave a subtle nod of reassurance, and then at Max, who returned her gaze with calm, unwavering focus. The courtroom murmured in anticipation. Some leaned forward, curious about the girl who had been at the center of this complex case for weeks. Others sat back, skeptical, dismissing her as just a child, too young to understand the intricacies of fraud, deception, and betrayal that had brought her family here. But Lily knew that age was irrelevant when truth had a way of revealing itself, and she had a plan. The prosecutor began his line of questioning, sharp and accusatory, attempting to unsettle her. "Miss Harper, are you certain that your mother had nothing to do with the missing funds?" His tone dripped with implied guilt, designed to plant seeds of doubt. Lily's eyes met his, unwavering, and she shook her head slowly. "I know she didn't," she said firmly. The words were small, but in the stillness of the courtroom they rang louder than any shout. Max's tail flicked once, a subtle acknowledgement of her courage, a silent promise that he was ready. As the questioning continued, Lily's mind raced. She had memorized every signal, every motion, and every step Max needed to take. She felt a thrill in the back of her chest, the kind that comes from knowing that something incredible was about to unfold, something no one in this room could anticipate. She subtly twitched her fingers again, almost invisible to the untrained eye, but Max saw it, understood it. The audience was unaware, yet tension crackled in the room like static. Every lawyer, juror, and spectator felt the intensity in the air but couldn't place its source. The prosecutor's voice wavered slightly as he pressed harder, unaware that the smallest movements from Lily could orchestrate a revelation that would stun everyone. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he sensed the unusual dynamic between the girl and her dog. Something was brewing, something he had not anticipated when he had called this trial to order. He adjusted his glasses, his mind racing to maintain control, but even he could feel the currents of suspense threading through the room, tightening with every tick of the clock. Lily's lips curved into the faintest smile, almost imperceptible but full of promise. Max shifted slightly, muscles taut, ready to respond. The courtroom held its breath, unaware that at this very moment, a child and a dog were about to change the course of the trial in ways no one could imagine. And then, with a small, almost invisible twitch of her fingers, Lily sent the signal. Max's ears twitched. The courtroom didn't notice, not yet, but the moment had arrived. The calm before the storm, the seconds before reality would crack open and reveal secrets that had been buried far too long. Everyone was about to witness something extraordinary. Max's ears twitched, and for a fraction of a second the courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath, though no one realized why. Lily's fingers had given the subtle signal, the one they had practiced endlessly in the quiet of their living room. Max understood perfectly. every muscle in his golden body coiled like a spring, his brown eyes locked on the girl who had trained him to read not commands but intentions. The prosecutor continued to speak, unaware of the silent exchange unfolding at the defense table. "Miss Harper, are you sure your mother was not present when the discrepancies in the accounts occurred?" he pressed, his tone sharp, as if each word could slice through the delicate certainty in Lily's mind. "I'm sure," Lily said again, her voice steady, though her heart pounded in her chest like a drum. She glanced at Max, who tilted his head slightly, acknowledging her. The signal had been subtle, one finger flick, but that was all Max needed. He rose from his spot, moving with deliberate precision, silent paws pressing against the hardwood floor. The courtroom, in its preoccupation with the questioning, barely noticed the shift in his posture. Max's movement, however, did not go unnoticed for long. The jury's collective attention slowly began to drift. A rustle in the gallery, a soft gasp from someone at the back. People turned their heads, trying to locate the source of the disruption, but the dog's calm demeanor disguised any sign of urgency. It was as if he were merely repositioning himself, nothing more. But those who looked closely noticed the intensity in his eyes, a focus that seemed almost human. Lily's lips curled into a tiny, confident smile. She had waited for this moment, the one they had rehearsed in countless quiet hours after school. Max moved closer to the jury box, stopping in front of the first juror. The envelope nestled under his paw was small, inconspicuous, and ordinary in appearance, yet it held secrets that could topple the case in a heartbeat. The jurors shifted in their seats, whispering, confused. "Is that a dog?" one muttered. "Is he dropping something?" another asked. The gallery leaned forward, curiosity sparking across the room like wildfire. Even the judge, perched high on his bench, squinted, his gavel momentarily frozen in midair. Something was happening here that no one could explain. Max nudged the envelope gently toward the judge's desk. His movements were deliberate, careful, not frantic, but precise, almost ceremonial. The room seemed to shrink around the moment, everyone caught in a suspended second where disbelief and curiosity collided. The judge reached down, hesitating, unsure whether to intervene or observe. Slowly, he picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of it, sensing that it was no ordinary piece of paper. Inside were photographs, their edges worn, showing moments nobody outside this courtroom had ever seen. Faces, documents, handshakes, all pieces of a puzzle carefully hidden. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Some covered their mouths, stunned. Others leaned forward, eyes wide, hearts racing. The prosecutor's face turned pale. He realized too late that the courtroom was no longer under his control. Lily's mother's hand flew to her mouth. Tears pricked her eyes, threatening to spill over. This was the evidence she had feared would never be found, the proof that could clear her name, that could finally tell the truth of the betrayal she had endured. The jurors stared, some incredulous, some horrified, as the layers of deception began to unfold before their eyes. Max sat back on his haunches, watching patiently. He had delivered the message, the first step in a chain reaction that Lily had orchestrated with meticulous care. Every twitch of her fingers, every subtle glance had been calculated. The courtroom was alive with tension. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to stifled exclamations. The judge, usually calm and unflappable, leaned forward, gripping the edge of his bench as if it were the only thing anchoring him. This is highly irregular," he said, his voice tight with disbelief. "How did this occur?" Lily's lips pressed into a thin line. She knew the judge would not understand, yet nobody would, until the entire chain of evidence revealed itself. Max's eyes met hers again, and she flicked her fingers subtly once more. Just a small, imperceptible movement, but it sent a surge of anticipation rippling through him. The prosecutor, sensing the shift, scrambled. "Objection, this is manipulation. A dog cannot deliver evidence." His words stumbled over each other, frantic, but the courtroom was no longer listening to him. Their attention was on the girl, her dog, and the envelope that had just upended everything. Max returned to his place beside the defense table, calm once more, his mission for now complete. But the tension in the air was palpable, electric. Something had been set in motion that could not be stopped. The jurors exchanged glances, their minds racing with questions. Who had prepared this? How had a dog been trained to act with such precision? And most importantly, what was coming next? Lily took a deep breath, her heart pounding, knowing that the most critical moment was still ahead. She had delivered the first signal, the first shock, but the true revelation, the one that would leave the courtroom gasping, was still to come. Every eye in the room was on her now, waiting for the next move, and Lily knew exactly what it would be. The courtroom was deathly silent, the kind of silence that pressed against your chest and made every heartbeat feel like a drum in the stillness. Judge Callahan leaned forward, adjusting his glasses with a shaky hand. He had seen plenty of trials in his 30-year career, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for what was unfolding before his eyes. Max sat obediently at the defense table, his golden coat gleaming under the courtroom lights. He was perfectly still, eyes fixed on Lily, who sat on the witness stand with a calmness that belied her age. Yet behind that calm exterior was a storm of nerves and anticipation. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, imagining every possibility, every reaction. But reality had a way of exceeding even the most meticulous plans. The judge tore open the envelope that Max had nudged forward. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, and small handwritten notes that appeared almost cryptic at first glance. Each photo captured moments previously unseen, documents being signed in shadowed offices, faces of people who were supposedly neutral witnesses, and the subtle exchange of envelopes in dimly lit corners. Each image told a story, a thread of deception woven carefully behind closed doors. Gasps echoed across the courtroom like a wave. Some jurors instinctively covered their mouths, others leaned forward, eyes wide. The prosecutor froze, his hand hovering over the table as if the paper itself had suddenly become a dangerous weapon. His carefully constructed arguments, his confidence, evaporated in an instant. He was unprepared for the reality staring back at him in the form of photographs and handwritten notes, a silent testimony that no lawyer's words could overshadow. Judge Callahan held one of the photographs up for closer inspection. It showed the defense's supposedly untrustworthy witness slipping an envelope across a desk to an unknown hand. The envelope's contents were unclear, but the implication was devastating. The judge's eyebrows shot up and he turned to the prosecutor. "Explain this," he demanded, though the words felt more like a whisper in a thunderstorm of disbelief. The prosecutor opened his mouth, but no words came. He sputtered, tried to argue, tried to dismiss the evidence as fabricated, but every argument fell flat. The photographs and notes were detailed, precise, and damning. The jury's attention had fully shifted from the lawyers to the girl and her dog, the pair who had orchestrated the delivery of truth in a way nobody could ignore. Lily's mother's eyes glistened with tears. For months she had been labeled a criminal, her reputation shredded by lies. She had lived in fear, waiting for a moment like this, a moment when the truth might finally surface. She watched Lily, so small and brave, and Max, the loyal dog who had been by her daughter's side through every quiet rehearsal. The combination of innocence, intelligence, and timing had created a spectacle that no courtroom drama could replicate. Lily shifted slightly on the stand and flicked her fingers once more. Max reacted instantly, rising from his position and moving toward the clerk who had just collected the first envelope. The second envelope, heavier and marked with a small, nearly invisible symbol, was slid across the floor with a gentle nudge of Max's nose. He returned to his spot without a sound, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred, but the courtroom knew better. The clerk, hesitant, handed the envelope to the judge. Judge Callahan opened it carefully, revealing handwritten notes that corroborated the photographs, detailing times, locations, and events. The documents indicated a conspiracy that had been hiding in plain sight, the very plot that had led to Lily's mother being falsely accused. Every detail was meticulous, leaving no room for doubt. The courtroom was suspended in a mixture of awe, fear, and disbelief. Even the jury, seasoned adults accustomed to logic and reason, were captivated. The evidence was not just convincing, it was cinematic, almost impossible to believe. The whispers grew louder, though no one dared to speak above the judge's voice. Every eye was fixed on Lily and Max, the unlikeliest heroes in a story of betrayal, greed, and deception. The prosecutor, pale and sweating, attempted one last desperate objection. "Your Honor, this is irregular. A dog cannot." But Judge Callahan cut him off, his voice firm, tinged with disbelief. "Enough. This courtroom is not a stage for theatrics. Evidence has been presented, and evidence must be considered." Lily's heartbeat quickened. The first wave of suspense had passed, but the true revelation, the evidence that would expose the real culprit, was still coming. Max sat back down, his tail swishing lightly against the floor, as if to say, "Be patient. The truth isn't finished yet." Outside the courtroom, sunlight slanted through the windows, painting golden streaks on the polished wood. Inside, a storm had begun and the tension was electric. Everyone present, from jurors to spectators, knew this trial would be remembered for decades, not because of the legal arguments, but because a little girl and her dog had quietly orchestrated the unveiling of hidden truths. And Lily, small yet unshakable, knew the best was yet to come. The secret evidence had been delivered, but the courtroom was on the brink of a revelation that would leave them all gasping. The courtroom had gone silent, but the tension inside it was palpable, a heavy, invisible weight pressing down on every person present. Judge Callahan leaned back slightly, eyes narrowed, staring at the photographs and documents that lay scattered across his bench. Each one revealed more than just facts. They revealed betrayal, deception, and a secret carefully buried for months. Lily sat on the witness stand, small but fierce, her hands gripping the edge of the platform. Her mother's eyes glistened with a mix of fear and hope as she watched her daughter. She had been fighting an invisible enemy for months, an unseen hand that had orchestrated her ruin. Now, thanks to Lily and Max, the courtroom was beginning to see the truth. Max, ever vigilant, sat at the defense attorney's side, his ears flicking at every sound, his eyes never leaving Lily. He was more than a dog in this moment. He was a partner, a guardian, and a silent messenger of the truth. With one subtle glance at Lily, he seemed to acknowledge, "We're not done yet." The judge held up one photograph, squinting at the details. It depicted a man in a dimly lit office, exchanging documents with someone whose face was deliberately obscured. The note attached to it bore a handwritten date and a name, the name of the person who had set the trap for Lily's mother. The courtroom murmured, whispers spreading like wildfire. The prosecutor's confident demeanor had all but vanished. He shuffled papers nervously, glancing at the evidence and then at Lily, unsure how a child had become the center of such a devastating revelation. His objections now sounded hollow, like a man shouting into a hurricane. This is circumstantial," he stammered, though even he couldn't quite convince himself of it. But Lily's attention was not on him. Her mind was focused, calculating her next move. She had memorized every step, every action, and now it was time to reveal the deeper truth, the family secret that had led them here. She took a deep breath and began, her voice steady, carrying through the courtroom. "My mom, she didn't do anything wrong," she said softly, yet every word carried weight beyond her years. "Someone wanted to make her look guilty. Someone who worked close to her, who knew all our secrets, someone we trusted." The jurors leaned forward spellbound, each word peeled back another layer of deception. The photographs and documents were only part of the story. Lily's narration now added the emotional context that made the evidence undeniable. "Months ago," she continued, "my mom discovered that money was missing. She tried to report it, but instead the blame was put on her. They made her look like the criminal." Her small voice trembled slightly, and her mother's hand reached forward to squeeze hers gently. Lily drew courage from that touch. Max shifted slightly, alert, sensing the emotional peak of the moment. Lily's fingers twitched subtly, the signal she had been holding back for the next step. Max's ears perked, and the dog rose quietly, his movements deliberate. The courtroom instinctively lined in, though they didn't yet understand why. The photographs on the judge's bench showed something shocking, evidence that Lily's mother had been framed by someone within her own company. The notes detailed manipulation, false accusations, and attempts to cover tracks, but the full story, the context, the motivation, the human betrayal was still hidden. That's what Lily was about to reveal. Lily's voice grew steadier as she continued, narrating events that no adult in the courtroom could have pieced together alone. He knew what to do to make my mom look guilty. He moved the files, he lied to people she trusted. He even tried to scare me and Max, but we weren't afraid, we were ready. Her mother's tears flowed freely now, but her expression was one of awe, pride, and relief. Every person in the courtroom felt it, the intensity of a family's struggle against a hidden enemy, the courage of a little girl, and the unwavering loyalty of a dog. Judge Callahan's gavel hovered midair, unsure whether to interject or to let the truth play out. The jurors' faces reflected shock and curiosity, their eyes darting between Lily, Max, and the evidence laid out before them. The prosecutor had no words that could rival what the audience was witnessing, a revelation so precise, so emotional, that logic alone could not contain its power. Lily flicked her fingers once more, just enough for Max to respond. The dog moved to the jury box, nudging a small folder toward them, the final piece of the puzzle. The jury gasped. The folder contained emails and recordings proving the manipulation, the lies, and the person who had orchestrated everything. The courtroom leaned in, collectively holding its breath. Even the judge's face had changed. Disbelief had given way to astonishment. He opened the folder carefully, revealing what everyone had been waiting for, the proof of betrayal, the key that could free an innocent woman. And in that moment the courtroom understood that this trial was no longer just a legal proceeding. It was a story of courage, loyalty, and secrets uncovered. A little girl and her dog had turned the tide, exposing truths that no adult, no matter how powerful, could ignore. The courtroom had witnessed the first wave of the hidden story, but the most shocking revelation, the identity of the real culprit, was still waiting to be unveiled. Everyone leaned forward, knowing the climax was coming. The courtroom had descended into a tense silence, the kind that makes the air feel heavy, like it could snap at any moment. Judge Callahan's gavel hovered midair, but his hands were frozen. His eyes, usually sharp and authoritative, were wide with disbelief. He had presided over hundreds of trials, seen countless arguments and disputes, but nothing had prepared him for this. A little girl and her dog orchestrating a revelation that unraveled an entire web of deceit right before his eyes. Max sat quietly beside the defense table, his golden coat shining under the overhead lights. His ears twitched in anticipation, and his eyes, deep and intelligent, never left Lily. The bond between them was palpable. It radiated a silent command that something extraordinary was about to unfold. He was not just a pet, not just a companion. He was an active participant in the unmasking of betrayal. Lily sat on the witness stand, small but unflinching, her hands gripping the edges of the platform. She took a steadying breath, feeling the rhythm of the room, the curiosity and shock radiating from the jury, the spectators, and even the stern-faced judge. Every glance she gave Max, every subtle flick of her fingers carried meaning. She had prepared for this moment, but the weight of reality made her heart pound. The prosecutor, a man who had exuded confidence just hours ago, was now pale, his composure crumbling. He shuffled papers nervously, casting anxious glances at the evidence and then at the little girl who had, in one subtle stroke, commandeered the courtroom's attention. "Objection," he barked, though his voice lacked conviction. This is highly irregular. A dog cannot." Judge Callahan silenced him with a look that combined authority with disbelief. "Enough. This courtroom is not a theater. Evidence has been presented, and it is to be considered," he said, his voice steady but tinged with incredulity. He picked up another envelope, this one heavier than the first, and opened it with a hand that trembled slightly. Inside were recordings, video and audio, that corroborated Lily's testimony and the photographs she had guided Max to deliver. The footage was clear and irrefutable. The real culprit, a man long trusted by Lily's mother, had orchestrated the entire scheme. He moved documents, manipulated accounts, and deliberately framed an innocent woman for a crime she did not commit. The courtroom gasped collectively, the sound echoing against the high ceilings like a wave crashing against stone. Lily's mother sat in stunned silence, tears spilling freely down her face. Months of fear, frustration, and helplessness were pouring out in that single moment. Her daughter, so small and brave, had done what no adult could, deliver justice through courage, ingenuity, and a bond with a dog that defied reason. Max, sensing the emotional peak of the moment, nudged another envelope toward the judge with his nose. Inside were detailed emails, timestamps, and further proof of deception. The judge, almost unable to believe his eyes, held up the documents for everyone to see. His eyebrows shot up, his mouth slightly agape. "I have never seen anything like this in my career," he admitted, his voice low but resonating with awe. "This is extraordinary." The jury leaned forward, riveted. Some whispered to each other, incredulous at the precision of the evidence. Others sat in stunned silence, their eyes reflecting disbelief and wonder. Every adult in that room, from lawyers to spectators, realized that the narrative they had assumed was true had been upended by a child and her dog, orchestrators of justice, in a way that no one could have imagined. The prosecutor's panic was now visible, his face ashen, sweat glistening along his hairline. He tried to interject, tried to salvage some semblance of authority, but every word he spoke faltered against the undeniable proof before him. The recordings, the photographs, the documents, all aligned perfectly, each piece corroborating the other. The chain of evidence was airtight, and the courtroom knew it. Lily, sensing the moment, flicked her fingers once more, a subtle, almost invisible movement. Max reacted instantly, rising from his place and moving carefully to the jury box. He nudged a small folder toward the jurors, who looked at it in shock. Inside were additional emails and recordings that directly implicated the man who had betrayed Lily's mother. The jury's eyes widened, their breath caught collectively in awe and suspense. Judge Callahan, still processing the cascade of revelations, leaned back in his chair, his gavel now resting on the bench as though it were too heavy to lift. This changes everything," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. His usual calm authority was replaced by disbelief, awe, and an unspoken recognition that the trial had just taken a turn no one could have predicted. Lily's small frame seemed to glow with quiet determination. She had delivered the first waves of evidence, and now the courtroom was completely under the spell of truth revealed. Max sat obediently, tail swishing lightly, as if acknowledging the gravity of what they had accomplished. The courtroom had witnessed the power of courage, intelligence, and loyalty manifest in a child and her dog. And yet, as Judge Callahan's eyes scanned the room, as the jury digested the evidence, a quiet tension lingered. The most shocking revelation, the full exposure of the real culprit's motive, the depth of his deception, was still to come. Everyone sensed it. The suspense in the air was electric, a taut thread ready to snap. The courtroom was on the brink of the ultimate revelation, and no one, not the judge, the prosecutor, or the jurors, would ever forget the moment when a little girl and her dog stopped the proceedings in their tracks. The courtroom had transformed into a charged arena of disbelief and mounting suspense. The weight of Lily's revelations and Max's orchestrated deliveries pressed down on every person present. The jurors shifted in their seats, whispering quietly to one another, their eyes darting between the envelopes, photographs, recordings, and most importantly, the little girl whose intelligence and courage had upended the entire trial. The prosecutor, once a figure of unshakable authority, now looked like a man on the verge of collapse. His face was pale, lips pressed tight, and beads of sweat ran down his forehead. Every argument he had meticulously prepared, every objection he had rehearsed, now felt meaningless. The courtroom had shifted, controlled by evidence and subtle signals that no one could anticipate, orchestrated by a child and her dog. "Objection," he barked, his voice cracking under the strain. This is completely irregular. Evidence cannot be delivered by a dog." Judge Callahan's gavel hovered in the air, his knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. His usual stoicism was gone, replaced by stunned disbelief. "Counselor," he said, his voice tight but firm, "the court has observed the delivery and the presentation. The evidence is being considered. Proceed accordingly." The prosecutor swallowed hard, realizing his objections were powerless. He turned toward the jury, trying to maintain control, but their attention was no longer on him. It was on Lily and Max. Every subtle twitch of her fingers, every gaze exchanged with the dog, seemed like a signal the courtroom instinctively understood, even if they didn't consciously register it. Max, sensing the emotional climax of the moment, rose from his position beside the defense attorney. His movements were deliberate and silent, yet the courtroom seemed to collectively inhale as he walked toward the jury box once again. Lily's fingers twitched subtly, just enough for him to respond. The dog nudged a small folder across the polished wooden floor. The envelope was light, unassuming, but it contained information that would shock everyone to the core. The jurors leaned forward in disbelief. The prosecutor's hands trembled as he gestured toward the folder, trying to intervene, but the judge held up a hand to silence him. With a deliberate motion, the jury foreman opened the folder and gasped. Inside were additional recordings, conversations, and emails that detailed the full extent of the deception against Lily's mother. The evidence revealed not only the man's manipulation of accounts and falsification of records, but also his attempts to control witnesses and silence anyone who might expose him. The room erupted in whispers. Some jurors' eyes widened in horror, others leaned closer to confirm what they were seeing. The gallery shifted uncomfortably, some covering their mouths, others gripping the benches in disbelief. Every adult in the room, from seasoned lawyers to spectators, understood that this was no ordinary case. This was a complete unraveling of a carefully constructed lie, exposed by a child's courage and a dog's loyalty. The prosecutor's panic intensified. He ran a hand through his hair, voice rising despite the judge's warning. "This is impossible. There is no precedent for this." He pounded his fist lightly on the desk, trying to regain control, but the words felt hollow, powerless against the momentum Lily had created. Every argument he offered was drowned out by the undeniable evidence. Lily, sensing the pressure in the room, took a deep breath. Her eyes met Max's, and she flicked her fingers once more. Max moved with perfect precision, walking slowly to the judge's bench and nudging a small envelope toward him. Inside were documents that exposed the timeline of the crime and the exact actions taken by the real culprit. The evidence was methodical, clear, and irrefutable. The judge took the envelope, opened it carefully, and felt a chill as the full scope of the deception became undeniable. Even the spectators, who had initially come for a routine court case, were now on the edge of their seats. Cameras in the back of the courtroom clicked as journalists documented every movement, every gasp, every reaction. The story unfolding before them was cinematic in its intensity, betrayal, courage, and clever strategy converging in a child and her dog. The jurors were stunned, exchanging looks of shock and awe. Some whispered, "I can't believe this is happening," while others simply stared at Lily, Max, and the evidence in silence. Every eye in the room recognized that the prosecutor no longer controlled the narrative. The trial had shifted irrevocably, moving at a pace and intensity that no one could have predicted. The prosecutor's panic reached its peak. He stumbled over his words, trying to dismiss the evidence, but the judge's stern gaze, the jury's unwavering attention, and the mounting proof made him realize he had lost. His authority, once solid as steel, was crumbling under the precise orchestration of Lily and Max. Lily, though small and composed, felt the thrill of anticipation pulse through her veins. The next moves, the climactic revelations that would expose the real culprit fully, were almost within reach. Max sat back down, tail swishing softly, eyes glowing with intelligence and readiness. The courtroom, caught in the suspense of the moment, sensed that the story was about to reach a point of no return. The tension was electric. The truth was almost fully revealed, and the courtroom teetered on the edge of a revelation that would leave everyone, from judge to jury to spectators, utterly stunned. The courtroom was electric, every heartbeat pounding like a drum in the silence between words. Every eye was fixed on Lily, the little girl who had orchestrated the unraveling of deception, and on Max, her golden retriever, who sat like a vigilant sentinel, ready for the signal that would change everything. The judge, forearms pressed to the bench, leaned forward, eyes wide with anticipation. The jurors were tense, their fingers interlaced in front of them as if holding themselves together against the storm about to break. Even the spectators, usually removed from the intensity of courtroom proceedings, were leaning forward, breathless. Lily took a deep breath. Her small hands rested lightly on the edge of the witness stand. This was the moment she had been building toward for months. Every whispered signal, every subtle motion, every late-night practice session with Max had led to this point. Her mother's eyes shone with hope, tears streaming down her face, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Max's ears twitched slightly, sensing the rising tension. Lily flicked her fingers almost imperceptibly, the signal he had been trained to respond to. Instantly Max rose, moving quietly but with purpose toward the jury box. He nudged a final envelope across the polished floor, his paw brushing it just enough to ensure the jurors could see it. The envelope was ordinary looking, but it held the piece of evidence that would expose the true culprit in a way no one could ignore. Judge Callahan carefully picked up the envelope, his hands trembling slightly. He opened it, revealing a series of video recordings. At first glance, they seemed like ordinary surveillance footage, mundane office shots of a busy workplace. But as the judge, the jury, and the spectators watched, the footage revealed something extraordinary. The man who had orchestrated the scheme, the one everyone had trusted, manipulating files, moving envelopes, and coaching witnesses to lie. The courtroom gasped collectively. Some jurors leaned forward so far it was almost painful to watch. Others covered their mouths in shock. The prosecutor's confident facade had completely shattered. His face drained of color as he realized he was no longer in control. Every attempt to interject, to argue, to object, fell flat against the undeniable truth laid bare by the videos. Lily's voice, small but unwavering, filled the courtroom. "This is him," she said, pointing toward the screen showing the man's face clearly. "He wanted to make my mom look guilty. He moved the money. He lied. He tried to hide everything. But now, everyone can see the truth." The jurors were silent, their disbelief palpable. The gallery was alive with whispers, questions, gasps. The prosecutor stammered, trying to regain composure. This isn't admissible. There's no chain of custody. This cannot." But Judge Callahan raised a hand, silencing him immediately. "Enough. The evidence has been presented, and its authenticity speaks for itself. The courtroom has witnessed facts that cannot be ignored." His voice carried authority, tinged with awe. Max returned to his place beside the defense table, sitting calmly, tail swishing slightly, as if to say, "The work is done for now." Lily exhaled, tiny shoulders rising and falling with relief, but she knew the final act was still unfolding, the emotional impact of the reveal, the truth sinking into every corner of the courtroom. The videos, combined with the photographs and emails previously delivered, left no room for doubt. The man had meticulously orchestrated the framing of Lily's mother, relying on intimidation and deception to manipulate witnesses and cover his tracks. But the evidence was irrefutable, meticulously laid out by the child who had refused to let injustice prevail. The judge's gavel hovered in the air, a symbol of finality waiting to strike. He looked from the evidence to Lily, to Max, and finally to the prosecutor. "I have presided over many cases in my career," he said slowly, "but I have never witnessed a trial resolved in this manner. The evidence is overwhelming, the truth undeniable." Lily's mother leaned forward, tears streaming down her cheeks as the tension that had gripped her for months began to lift. She looked at her daughter with a mixture of awe, relief, and pride. "You did it, Lily," she whispered, voice trembling. "You saved us." The jurors exchanged stunned glances, realizing that this trial had transcended legal argument. It had become a story of courage, loyalty, and intelligence, delivered through a child and her dog. The courtroom had witnessed something extraordinary, a meticulously executed reveal that left no room for deception or denial. The prosecutor's face was pale, his voice barely above a whisper. How could a child and a dog?" He trailed off, incapable of finishing the thought. The courtroom had moved beyond his control. He was now a spectator in a story that had been masterfully orchestrated by those he had underestimated. Judge Callahan finally let the gavel fall, a single, decisive strike that echoed through the silent courtroom. "The evidence is clear," he said, voice resonating with authority and disbelief. "The real culprit has been revealed. Justice will be served." Lily exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her body in a wave of relief and quiet triumph. Max sat beside her, tail swishing gently, eyes reflecting the calm satisfaction of a job perfectly executed. The courtroom, stunned into silence just moments ago, now began to hum with energy, whispers of astonishment and awe filling the room. The truth had been revealed, the culprit exposed, and the courtroom would never forget the courage of a little girl and her dog, the unlikely heroes who stopped the trial in its tracks. The gavel's echo had barely faded when the courtroom seemed to release a collective breath it didn't realize it had been holding. Silence fell for a moment, broken only by the soft rustle of papers and the quiet whimper of a spectator overcome by emotion. Then one by one, murmurs began to ripple through the room, whispers of disbelief, awe, and slowly understanding. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. Judge Callahan leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the courtroom. Even he, a man who had seen decades of law and deception, was shaken. The evidence presented, he said, voice steady but heavy with gravity, is both comprehensive and undeniable. The real culprit has been exposed, and the innocent must be exonerated. His gaze shifted to Lily's mother, who sat trembling with relief, tears streaking her cheeks. Mrs. Harper, you're cleared of all charges. Justice has been served. A wave of gasps, sobs, and whispers spread through the courtroom. The jurors, many still in stunned silence, slowly exhaled, their tension melting into awe. The spectators, who had come expecting an ordinary trial, now bore witness to a story that felt larger than life, a story where courage, intelligence, and loyalty had triumphed over deceit and corruption. Lily's mother stood shaking and crossed to her daughter. She knelt beside her, embracing her tightly. "You saved us," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Lily hugged her back, small arms wrapped around her mother, but her mind was already racing ahead, Max, the silent hero, waiting beside them. Max's tail wagged lightly, his eyes bright and calm, reflecting the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. He had been more than a pet in this trial. He had been an essential part of the team, a partner in exposing the truth. Everyone in the courtroom, from the jury to the judge, understood it, even if words could not capture the magnitude of what had happened. Judge Callahan cleared his throat, regaining composure. "Let it be known," he said, voice resonating through the chambers, "that the actions taken by this child and her dog have directly led to the exoneration of an innocent woman and the exposure of a carefully orchestrated deception. This courtroom acknowledges their courage, ingenuity, and dedication to justice." The words, formal as they were, carried a weight that none could ignore. The prosecutor, now pale and defeated, sat frozen at his desk. His once confident demeanor had crumbled completely. He had been trained to argue, to manipulate, to control a courtroom, yet he had been outmaneuvered by the unexpected, a little girl and her dog, operating with subtle signals and an unyielding sense of justice. He looked at Lily, then Max, then back at the judge, unable to articulate the impossibility of what had just occurred. The jurors, sensing the end of the trial, began to murmur among themselves, sharing astonished glances. One juror whispered almost to herself, "I've never seen anything like this, a child and a dog saving the day." Others nodded, their expressions reflecting wonder and admiration. Cameras from news crews captured every moment, knowing that the story, small girl, loyal dog, courtroom triumph, would go viral, a tale that would be retold for years. Lily's mother held her hand tightly, tears flowing freely now. "You were so brave," she said, voice breaking. "I've never been more proud of anyone in my life." Lily smiled faintly, still catching her breath from the emotional roller coaster. She had been small, underestimated, dismissed, and yet she had orchestrated the downfall of a powerful deceiver, all while keeping her cool and guiding Max in perfect synchronization. Max padded to Lily's side, resting his head gently against her lap. She stroked his fur, whispering, "We did it, boy, we did it." His tail wagged once, a gentle, satisfied thump against the polished floor. In that simple gesture, the bond between girl and dog felt unbreakable, a testament to trust, teamwork, and quiet intelligence. Judge Callahan rose slightly, the gavel in hand, but unnecessary now. This courtroom will remember today not for the crime committed, but for the courage, intelligence, and determination that revealed the truth. The Harper family is vindicated. The trial is concluded. The spectators erupted in soft applause, jurors nodding and murmuring their approval. The prosecutor slumped, defeated but no longer a threat. The courtroom had been claimed by truth and by the small, brave duo who had dared to act where adults had failed. As Lily and her mother left the courtroom, the crowd parted with whispers of admiration. Max followed faithfully, every step deliberate and proud. Outside, sunlight bathed them in golden light, a symbolic illumination of justice restored. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Lily simply held her mother's hand, Max at her side, walking into a new chapter of freedom, vindication, and quiet triumph. The story of that day would be told over and over. A courtroom brought to its knees by courage, a little girl who refused to be underestimated, and a dog who understood the meaning of loyalty, justice, and silent signals. In the end, justice had been delivered, not by lawyers or judges alone, but by the unlikeliest of heroes, a small girl and her devoted dog. The courtroom would never forget the day they stopped proceedings in their tracks, and neither would America.